Everything is strange because everything is from long ago. And because everything is in that place where you can't tell dreams from memory. And because these large zones of the world were not, at the time, pulled apart from each other. And to experience the strangeness, to feel an emotion, to be petrified before a fantastical image always means one and the same thing: to regress, to turn around, to descend back into the archaic quick of your mind, to look with the eyes of human larvae, to think something that is not a thought with a brain that is not yet a brain, and which melts into a quick of rending pleasure which we, in growing, leave behind. Hey everybody, thank you for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I'm talking about Blinding by Mircea Cărtărescu. This has been translated from the Romanian by Sean Cotter. It's put out by the divine Archipelago books. I mean, who doesn't love these Archipelago books? The form factor of them, the way they fit into the hand, the French flaps, the wonderful artwork. This is very apt artwork from Kandinsky, psychedelic element of it, the surrealist element, and then also all the use of color. This is a very colorful book. Is perfectly chosen to adorn the cover of this, even if I don't even care. I can't speak Romanian, and this is the first of Romanian literature I've ever read. But Sean Cotter, this translation, the writing is so sublime and so well done. It doesn't even matter, really. I mean, it does, but for the purposes of this argument, I don't know Romanian, so even if I had the original text, I couldn't talk about the merits of Cotter's translation. But even if this were, this reads so well in English that it really, regardless of the technicalities of the translation, this is a testament to incredible translator Sean Cotter, who is award-winning. Really, he has done such a great job. I don't have the superlatives at my disposal to talk about how well this reads in English. Words that come to mind: phantasmagorical, incantatory, sublime, hallucinatory, Proustian. I usually don't read blurbs off of books, but in this case, this one by Andrei Codrescu, I have to read. He says, "A writer," meaning Cărtărescu, "a writer who has always had a place reserved for him in a constellation that includes the Brothers Grimm, Franz Kafka, Jorge Luis Borges, Bruno Schultz, Julio Cortázar, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Milan Kundera, and Milorad Pavic, to mention just a few." And to those, I would also add now, this came out in 1996, but yes, Proust is very apt. But now, Cărtărescu writing at the end of the 20th century, whereas Proust is writing at the beginning of the 20th century, Cărtărescu now has a whole century's worth of progress in neuroscience at his disposal. And he brings that, especially the technical vocabulary from neuroscience and from the chemical reactions that are actually happening in our synapses and all these things, the mapping of the geology or geography of the brain is brought to bear here that Proust didn't have. But still, Proust's own introspection is there. I would also add Karl Ove Knausgaard, the My Struggle series, in terms of memoir and place. In the case of Blinding, it is Bucharest. In the case of Karl Ove, of course, it's Norway. But whereas there is a ceiling of realism for both Karl Ove and Proust, there is no ceiling for Cărtărescu. He will go from that very minuscule, making an epic of the ordinary realism, where, something as banal and perfunctory as the smoothing of the wrinkles on a dress are, that action is given epic depth. You know, that's also the case in Karl and Proust, but there's no ceiling for Cărtărescu. So he has this sort of process, this progressive mode that I noted, where he'll go from observation to memory to sensuous imagery to psychedelic dream to nightmare in some cases, and then to apocalyptic heights in some cases. And this progression will happen in cycles again and again. I would also add in the energetic reverie that you get in The Best of Henry Miller, the jubilation of language and the blending of the sacred and the profane that you get in Ricky Ducournay. And then, of course, like Cărtărescu said, Borges features in here. Certainly, the way that Borges takes mathematical concepts and philosophical concepts and blends them into fiction, especially playing with time and space and identity, is certainly here on display. In terms of Proust, there's that daydreaming and that involuntary memory, the sanctity of memory. For Cărtărescu, the only thing that truly exists is the past, and memory is sacrosanct. The mother, the obsession and fascination with the mother is here. Cărtărescu even inserts himself into the narrative as Mircea, the same way that we find Marcel in Proust. But we also, we don't stay in the first person. We don't stay with the figure of Mircea / Marcel. He will switch to the third person. He says, "We all have memories of the past, but none of us can remember the future. And yet we exist between the past and future like the vermiform body of a butterfly in between its two wings." And so indeed, the butterfly becomes a symbol in many, many ways, including the structure. So Blinding is actually part one of 3 volumes that make up this memoir. It's much more than just a memoir, but we'll call it that for the sake of this video. This is just the first volume. Only the first volume is in English, unfortunately. But I reached out because as soon as when I was getting close to finishing this, I knew I have to read the other 2 volumes of this. And I reached out to the international authority on books in translation. That would be Andre of the Untranslated. And as you can see here, he said the bad news is there are no plans, but the good news is Deep Vellum is bringing out more of Cărtărescu. And New Directions also has some other Cărtărescu for us. But in any case, this is considered book 1, and it's the left wing. And then book 2 is the body, and book 3 is the right wing. And so the butterfly, like that passage I just read, is a symbol of ourselves in time and space. We're in that vermiform body of the present, stuck between the left wing of the past and the right wing of the future. And so also that means that this book is starting in the past. We're going into Mircea's childhood. Also the mother figure, who is represented here under the name Maria, which also has Catholic connotations or Christian connotations. But also there is a birthmark or a marking of a violet butterfly on the mother's hip in here. And so there's a lot of symmetries going on. This is a memoir in 3 parts, and then itself is broken into 3 parts. There's a metafictional element where he talks about the actual writing of this. And really, apparently he wrote this longhand, late at night and with no corrections. There's a remarkable story around the construction of this book, but basically he went into sort of trances to write this thing. But his sort of declaration of the work at hand, he says, "But today at the midpoint of my life's arc," and of course this should remind us of Dante, "when I have read every book, even those tattooed on the moon and on my skin, even those written with the tip of a needle on the corners of my eyes, when I have seen enough and had enough, when I have systematically dismantled my five senses, when I have loved and hated, when I have raised immortal monuments in copper, when my ears have grown long awaiting our little God, without understanding for a long time that I am just a mite burrowing my trails through his skin of old light, when angels have populated my head like spirobacteria, when all the sweetness of the world has been consumed, and when April and May and June are gone, today, when my skin flakes beneath my ring like thousands of layers of onion paper, today, this vivacious and absurd today, I try to put my disorder into thought. What incredible writing. Just this frenetic, visionary writing. But his statement of intent, he's trying to put disorder into thought. But it goes on beyond that. Really, what we see towards the end of the book is what he is after. And the whole purpose of memoir is revelation. It was a place to attempt, as I've done continuously for the last 3 months, meaning the last 3 months of writing this, to go back where no one has, to remember what no one remembers, to understand what no person can understand, who I am, what I am. He's after revelation, not a verbatim rechronicling of what actually was. This is impossible. This is something that Karl Ove Knausgaard also gets at toward the later volumes of his book, when, of course, he now has upset family members, especially a very upset uncle who's suing him for libel. And he's talking about the plight of veracity, or really the impossibility of veracity. He blends Eastern and Western symbolism and mythology. He brings in the 7 chakras in amazing ways. He's very much about ordering and structure and symmetry. And he brings in, the butterfly, the 7 chakras, but he also has an incredible vocabulary from biology and natural science that he brings in a way, like I've said, that Ducournay does so well. Every time I sat down with this book to read it, I thought, will the magic still be there? And I am happy to say that from page 1 to the last page, it's about 464 pages, but again, in this small form factor that Archipelago puts out, every time I sat down with it, that magic was still there. Truly an amazing treat for readers. Here is an excerpt of this incredible writing. She held out her hand with such grace that it seemed to cascade from her body, like a pseudopodium full of fluorescent corpuscles, flowing gently, undulating, pouring toward the brass plaque through the flickering delta of her 5 fingers, over one of the canals filled with ships' barges and picturesque water houses, the ring of mammoth hair arched like a bridge. He's describing a real physical ring that's on her finger. Her index finger, with her painted nail reflecting for a second the enormous orange sky, with the surrounding buildings, and in the center, her face as thin as Mircea's face, bent over this page of the book, as though it were the golden space of an aquarium, delicately touched the concave surface of the button, pressed it down to the level of the yellowed plaque. Someone with the perspective of an angel or a Laplacian demon. Someone whose eyes could perceive not only the refraction of corpuscles or photonic waves across the surface of objects, but also the objects themselves, as they really are, suddenly given in all their details at every level that our minds artificially separate: mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, philosophy, poetry, as though the entire mind became an eye, one of the billion eyes of God. Someone who could come closer and closer to the image of Maria's glassy-skinned finger, branded with the design of her fingerprint, until he practically became one with it, and also with every molecule of the ebony elevator button. This is all taking place when Maria is pressing a button on an elevator, by the way. He would have witnessed the strange and unexpected meeting of 2 universes. He would have seen that in between the 2 surfaces, one of flesh, the other of former flesh, there was, however strong the pressure, a minuscule space, and there, in a no-man's land, like between neuronal synapses, there were negotiations. Deals were made, prisoners were traded, and sophisticated passwords were exchanged, not in words, but in spatial whirls and torsions, the neurotransmitters fire in thin fountains, green, yellow like venom, or fluorescent blue, moving chemotactically toward the receptors in the button. There, like the keys in a lock, they match, displace, or block other substances, palaver endlessly in the catecholinergic code, and in the end are reabsorbed, dismantled, and transformed into other and yet other substances, later absorbed by the kidneys of the cosmos and eliminated from existence. Meanwhile, their oriental chattering inserts itself through long neural pathways into the elevator's nervous system, transmitted from axon to axon through ring-form demyelinated delays, the ring finger appearing from place to place, reaching the motor area after countless intermediaries, reconversions, distortions, and retardations, to operate for the first time after years of impasse, the petrified organism of the electric motor. I mean, this book is so well written. It is one of the greatest pleasures I've ever had reading a book. Books like these are why I endlessly read. I'm searching for gems like this, almost to get an aesthetic fix. But it's so much more than just fireworks, too. Sometimes you find books that are so beautifully written, but there's no substance. In here, Mircea's plight for reaching back into memory to figure out what he is and who he is and to have that revelation ultimately leads to an ending that is perfectly commiserate with the rest of the book. Sometimes books start off incredible and with all this reverie, but then they kind of fizzle out, and it can't sustain itself. It writes a check bigger than it can cash. But this one actually ends even more sublime than it starts. And I won't read anything from the ending, but suffice it to say that it ultimately leads from the preoccupations with time, memory, and place, this being the phantasmagorical Bucharest for place, but it leads to a meditation on the absolute. And I will say this about it. It is as good as the best of Borges. And furthermore, it's a complete dismantling and reconstructing of the perennial philosophical question of the chicken and the egg. Please check out Mircea Cărtărescu's Blinding from Archipelago Books. This is one of the best books I have ever read.